Okay, now, like a lot of 19th century literature, and this story was published in 1853. Office life was just starting to get started in America, in cities. The farm life was still the most common, but office life was starting. Folks, this is modern day office life, and I know some of you already know that. I just want to wrap things up on the narrator's guilt. This being a 19th century story, there are plenty of biblical references throughout, and there's just one that I want to key in on here. Matthew 18:4-6. So Jesus called a child, had him stand in front of them, and said, I assure you that unless you change and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. The greatest in the kingdom of heaven is the one who humbles himself and becomes like this child. And whoever welcomes in my name one such child as this welcomes me. If anyone should cause one of these little ones to lose his faith in me, it would be better for that person to have a large millstone tied around his neck and be drowned in the deep sea. Now, a millstone is a round disc of stone, maybe that thick, that big around, at least, that turned on top of another one to grind grain into flour. Where does that come up in the story? I have given up my copying, Bartleby answered, and slid aside. He remained as ever, a fixture in my chamber. Nay, if that were possible, he became still more of a fixture than before. What was to be done? He would do nothing in the office. Why should he stay there? In plain fact, he had now become a millstone to me, not only useless as a necklace, but afflictive to bear. So the millstone reference, very clear reference to Matthew, and the idea that Bartleby has become a burden to him, a millstone hanging around his neck. It also ties in with Bartleby being childlike, and you have to care for the children. It ties in with the narrator's guilt for not being able to reach Bartleby and to help him. So I do think the narrator is a good guy, but he definitely shapes the story in a way to defend against any criticism from others, but primarily criticism from himself. All right. On to the conclusion. Teaching's taken me to some strange places over the years, but nothing ever quite like this. Okay, folks, welcome back. We're going to have our last scene here with Bartleby the Scrivener. This, of course, is how his life comes to an end in a fetal position along a wall, with the sky above, but in the Manhattan prison, the tombs. Let's take a good close look at the last couple pages. Now I'm just going to read a few paragraphs that you guys wrote on the discussion board. It's as good or better than anything I can come up with. Being under no disgraceful charge, and quite serene and harmless in all his ways, they had permitted him freely to wander about the prison, and especially in the enclosed, grass-plated yards thereof. And so I found him there, standing all alone in the quietest of the yards, his face toward a high wall, while all around from the narrow slits of the jail windows I thought I saw peering out upon him the eyes of murderers and thieves. Bartleby! I know you, he said without looking around, and I want nothing to say to you. Now that's interesting. Did he recognize the voice?
Or does it not matter? I know you without looking around. Melville wouldn't put that in there just to say, oh, he knows the voice. Melville put that in there because Bartleby is speaking to all humanity here. I know you. I know you. I know you. He knows all of us. It was not I that brought you here, Bartleby. Always the defensive, said I, keenly pained at his implied suspicion. And to you this should not be so vile a place. Nothing reproachful attaches to you by being here. And see, it's not so sad a place as one might think. Look, there's the sky, and here's the grass. I know where I am, he replied, but would say nothing more, and so I left him. As I entered the corridor again, a broad, meat-like man in an apron accosted me, and jerking his thumb over his shoulder said, "Is that your friend?" "Yes." "Does he want to starve? If he does, let him live on the prison fare, that's all." Looking for money. "Who are you?" I asked, not knowing what to make of such an unofficially speaking person in such a place. "I'm the grub man," someone else named after food. "Such gentlemen as have friends here hire me to provide them with something good to eat." "Is this so?" said I, turning to the turnkey, the prison keeper. He said it was. "Well then," and he gave him some money to feed Bartleby. Took him over to make an introduction. Bartleby says, for the 20th time in the story, Bartleby says, "I prefer not to." "Dine today," said Bartleby, turning away. "It would disagree with me. I am unused to dinners." "How's this?" said the grub man. "He's odd, ain't he?" "I think he's a little deranged," I said, sadly. So the narrator, still worried, still looking out for Bartleby, comes back. And another day, a few days go by. "Are you looking for the silent man?" said the turnkey, passing me. "Yonder he lies, sleeping in the yard there. 'Tis not 20 minutes since I saw him lie down." The yard was entirely quiet. It was not accessible to the common prisoners. The surrounding walls of amazing thickness, thick walls now, kept off all sounds behind them. The Egyptian character of the masonry waited upon me with its gloom, but a soft imprisoned turf grew underfoot. The heart of the eternal pyramids, it seemed, wherein, by some strange magic, through the clefts, grass seed dropped by birds and sprung. Melville is taking us back into ancient times. The pyramids were built as tombs for the pharaohs. Strangely huddled at the base of the wall, his knees drawn up and lying on his side, his head touching the cold stones, I saw the wasted Bartleby, but nothing stirred. I paused, then went close to him, stooped over, and saw that his dim eyes were open. Otherwise he seemed profoundly sleeping. Something prompted me to touch him. I felt his hand when a tingling shiver ran up my arm and down my spine to my feet. The round face of the grub man peered upon me now. "His dinner's ready. Won't he dine today either? Or does he live without dining?" "Lives without dining," said I, and closed the eyes. He's asleep, ain't he?" "With the kings and counselors," murmured I. Now, kings and counselors is, you guessed it, because of the footnote, a reference to Job. And if you didn't have a chance to look it up, I looked it up for you. It's not my favorite Bible. The Good News Bible is not written in the language of the 19th century, but it'll have to do for today. Job, of course, was put through great suffering to test his faith. "I wish I had died in my mother's womb, or died the moment I was born. Why did my mother hold me on her knees? Why did she feed me at her breast? If I had died then, I would be at rest now, sleeping like the kings and counselors." From the book, With Kings and Counselors. That's Job regretting that he was born. And that is what the narrator is thinking here at the end. Now, earlier I said the narrator is really the main character of the story, and I think there's a very good case to be made for that. Not that it's that important, The main character is the character that goes through change. The narrator is this very safe, paper-pushing lawyer at the beginning. And by the end, he's become bonded to this inscrutable, enigmatic Scrivener named Bartleby. He's going to the jail. He doesn't want to be seen in a jail, but he goes anyway. He's reading, earlier, he's reading philosophy, right? Trying about will and preference. And finally, at the end, Cat asks this question, the last sentence. Ah, Bartleby. Ah, humanity. So at the end, Bartleby has come to represent all humanity, cut off from each other. Chris writes, I think the meaning of Ah Bartleby, Ah humanity has to represent how absurd humanity can be. For example, the lawyer thought Bartleby was unpredictable. Bartleby was not unpredictable because he stared at the blank wall in the office and also the blank wall in the prison, which represented Bartleby seeing no future ahead of him. Bartleby saw no point in being a part of humanity or living. He refused to eat, got himself fired just to basically starve himself to death. He simply gave up on life. Rita, I think the purpose of that last line is to reinforce the concept that the entire story was a depiction of human society, as told through the eyes of our narrator. I also believe that it serves to show the narrator coming to terms with the possible backstory that our Bartleby may have had. I like that, Rita. Our Bartleby. That he comes from the dead letter office, a place where mail has nowhere to go and nowhere to return to, essentially serving as the post office purgatory, and then it got shut down. I think the narrator is just realizing that poor Bartleby had no hope from the start, that our society has been built to topple people like him in its wake. And Emma brings in the psychological. Bartleby is not the only person in the world that has this way of thinking about life. If you are depressed, others can tell and try to help, but they usually watch that person become a ghost of what they used to be. Since Bartleby doesn't say who he was before, we can only assume that he thought he was nothing and slowly started to adapt to that view of himself. It seems like a reflection of society. There are other Bartlebys out in the world. What will humanity become if we just throw them in jail instead of helping them, like the lawyer tried to? I like all of that. I like that, Emma. The lawyer, I think he does do his best, and that maybe that's the tragedy of the story, is that Bartleby, maybe he is deeply depressed. He seems to have us staring into nothingness. And the narrator, the lawyer, does everything he can to help him. And it still doesn't work. And anybody who's experienced trying to help someone who is self-destructing, either through depression or addiction, it's hard. It's very, very hard. So Melville presents us with the very difficult story, beautifully written, funny, dark comedy. But ultimately, he provides no answers for us. And Melville's so good at this, and that's why it's so deep and he's so respected as a great American author. He provides no answers. He does not tell us that you just have to try harder. No, he doesn't tell us that to give up. He doesn't tell us anything. He just shows us this wall of humanity to stare at and to look at. And I think that's the real power of this piece.